Hello, BookTube. It's Saturday, so time for another book to film episode. And this week is Shane. It's the 1949 book written by Jack Schaefer, and the 1953 film directed by George Stevens, a Paramount film. And an interesting thing regarding the film, there's a few connections with last week's film, The Uninvited. I didn't plan this. It just sort of was an interesting. Well, there's many connections, but because they're Paramount Pictures, however, there's two sort of main ones that are kind of interesting that are connected with the screenplay and so forth. Anyway, as I say, it's a western, so it's a bit of change of pace, and the book was published by Houghton Mifflin. I think it was, yeah, Houghton Mifflin. Houghton Mifflin Harcourt Publishing in 1949. Very short novel. It's just over 160 pages. It's basically it's narrated. It's by a young boy, sort of pre-teens, early teens, and it's some events during the summer of 1889 in Wyoming. And during that summer, he's sitting on the fence and he's watching up the road, the valley, and he sees someone on horseback coming, and it turns out to be Shane, a mysterious stranger riding into the valley, who stops at their farmstead and asks if he could water his horse and have a drink himself. And his father says he can. And they get to talking a little bit, and he sort of likes them, just first impressions. And he stays to have a meal, and he asks him to stay for the night as well. And they have long chats, over the kitchen table. But Shane is very, very hesitant to talk about his past. He just sort of gives vague answers when he's asked about things. But the Bob's father, the Joe Starrett, keeps talking about his plans for the farm and everything. So, and Shane listens, and they chat, and he sleeps out in the barn. And the next morning, he's fully ready to leave. And but somebody comes on a wagon who is sort of like a traveling goods salesman, and has brought the promised cultivator that Joe Starrett had asked for, and wants an exorbitant price for it. And Shane steps out sort of from the shadows, in a sense, and says, well, I just saw one in Cheyenne for $60 for this. And the guy's asking for over $100 for it. So, and the salesman is very, very irate and angry that basically Shane is queering his pitch, in a sense. And he asks Starrett, like, oh, are you gonna listen to this, a stranger, believe him over me? And Starrett says, yes, I am gonna believe him over you, and I'll give you this amount for it. I'll give you $80 for it. It's sort of profit plus carriage, basically, to get it there, shipping. So the guy does take it, and he goes off, and Shane was sort of very impressed. Like, it's a very pivotal scene Shane is extremely impressed that his father, just knowing him, trusts him. And he he just sort of lingers around. He stays there and he stays in the afternoon, but he starts helping. He picks up an axe because there's a stump that Starrett's been trying to sort of dig out for 2 years, basically. And because he's showed him kindness and believing him. It's, as I say, it's a pivotal scene because you could tell the character is he's trying to leave something behind. Shane is, and he's trying to leave his sort of old life behind, and so here's somebody who's a stranger that believes in him. So he helps him, and they take out the stump, and he winds up staying to help with the farm. But he finds out too that there is a rancher named Fletcher, a big landowner that is not a pleasant person. He sort of has seen over the last few years farmsteaders, homesteaders, encroaching on his homesteading on what he claims is his range, his land. Because he had range rights for it. But at this time, things were changing, and it was, the land was being enclosed. And and then that's the conflict sort of that starts up because the Fletcher, the big landowner, the range owner, he gets a big contract to supply beef, so he needs more land, so he wants these pesky homesteaders, sodbusters off his land as he sees it. So and they see sort of Shane as an obstacle because stranger, unknown, and Shane goes into town to have an implement welded or fixed at the blacksmith. But while he's there, he pops into the saloon, gets a drink, and one of the range hands um, sort of accosts him and says, that you stink, you smell like pigs, and all this, and then says, "Oh, do you really drink or something like that, or are you just soda pop?" I didn't know anybody, the sodbusters, drank anything more than just soda pop, so it made him sort of a sissy. He's making fun of him, and so he buys him a drink, and he says, "Oh, you do drink whiskey," and but then Shane, because the soda pop was mentioned, he asked the bartender, "Do you have any soda pop?" So everybody sort of is tittering, laughing, and he gets the bottle of soda pop, and he doesn't no conflict, like physical conflict with this guy. He just sort of tells them and says, "Oh, you're from Fletcher." He said, "Well, go home, tell him to send a man, to go come do his dirty work than a boy." So it was like a real burn for him. So he walks out, he goes home, but that sort of story gets passed around, that Fletcher's men sort of bullied him, and he was a coward because he didn't stand up for anything. And it turns out he takes the soda pop to give to Bob, Starrett's son. And then there is another time that they go in. He goes back into town, and he meets this cowhand there, this range hand again, Chris, and he has a fight with him, and he's just like, he's quite brutal. He breaks his arm, just snaps his arm in half, and the guy just sort of crawls off. And so, it's like, oh, this is serious. And Fletcher sees this as being serious as well. So they see all this, the or well, they hear the stories and everything. Um, the other homesteaders, and they're worried. They're afraid because they've been, a few have sort of been run out. So they're back into town again a little later on, like a few weeks, because this happens over the whole summer, and uh, Starrett's in with the family to buy supplies, and Shane goes back into the saloon, and there's like um, Fletcher sends like there's five of them, five of these big guys to rough up Shane, and sort of, as they say, ride him out on a rail. But they're gonna beat him up, you know, um, before they do that, and they'd already done that to the other hired hand that Starrett had. Hence, he had an opening for a person, and it's kind of thing that you can tell sort of through the writing that Shane doesn't really want to do this, but he's a bit forced into the situation, and he won't back down, he won't back away. So he fights the five, and he's getting a little tired near the end, and then Starrett comes in and helps him, and just Starrett is like a massive man, and he just picks up one guy and just lifts him over his head and throws him against the wall. Um, and so they win the fight, which even just incenses Fletcher more. So Fletcher turns out to sends off to Cheyenne or goes to Cheyenne to hire a hired gun, a gunfighter to take care of them, because he's had it, and if it means killing them, then fine. So he does that, and the hired gun Wilson, goads one of the homesteaders to draw. So therefore, it's self defense. He shoots and kills him. Starrett is incensed by this and want sort of retribution and so forth. And he's just had it as well, and he's gonna go in and face Fletcher and face Wilson, but um, Shane says, well, you can't do that because you might be able to take Fletcher, but Wilson is a gunfighter. You're never gonna take him. So while they're sitting at the table, Shane knocks him out with the butt of his gun, and then he rides off into the town to have it out with them. So and Bob, the boy, runs after him into the town and watches the gunfight. So he shoots the gunfighter, and he gets hit himself in the side. Shane does, but he also kills Fletcher. And then he sort of, gets on his horse and is going to ride out. And Bob doesn't want him to go. And then he sees that he's hurt, but he says, no, it's not that bad and everything. But it's in his side. So, and he's bleeding quite heavily. But he rides off into sort of the sunset to it. And it's sort of everything sort of, their problems are sort of solved because the evil ranch owner is gone, and the menace is gone, and that's where it sort of ends. It's a summer about this, and it was an enjoyable read, but it's like, to me, it's a juvenile story, and it is told through the eyes of a young adult. But it says here, like, the introduction was written by another author, which I'm not familiar with, Ronald Smith or Roland Smith, in 2013. He's saying it's almost like a perfect novel, and there's like, quotes on the back here: Shane is a work of literature first and a Western second. I don't think it's that good. I don't think it's that well written. It's basically, uh, there's a lot of themes in there because Shane wants to, he comes into the valley. He's not wearing his guns, when he comes in, and that's gonna be relevant for the film, like the differences. But he's not wearing his guns. He wants to give up the old life, but he can't, and he realizes that that you can't escape. Once he was a gunman, and he has killed. He can't escape that. He can't escape that. Even though he tried to do it, but it sort of came back. And also to the Starrett is your archetypal perfect homesteader, righteous man, good family man, morals, principles, hard worker, and everything like that. And these are sort of the themes, the tropes, I guess, if you want to say it, of typical westerns. It does, this one does, rather than like if we go back to the dime novels of the 19th century that started with just a brief thing. Dime novels started in like about 1860s during the Civil War, right up until sort of the early 20th century, and they were sort of sensational literature. It's sort of akin to the British penny dreadfuls in a sense. And they were small little pamphlets, novels usually about 100 pages long, and westerns was a popular thing with them. And it had this, they had these themes where somebody trying, good guy, triumphs over bad, and that. And it reminds me too of like the 30s westerns. I used to watch a lot of these when I was a child. The good guys wore white hats, the bad guys wore black hats. It was just that simple, and you didn't go into details about it. This one goes into a few details. You can see the moral and immoral ambiguity, and the moral sort of uh, and the internal strife a little bit with uh, with Shane. But it's sort of okay. Uh, let's say, for instance, this is the old films, like, it's just skimming the surface. It's just barely skimming the surface about the moral ambiguity and stuff like this. Black hats, white hats, type thing. And then you got Shane that just is just under the surface there, and is dipping into and starting into a little bit of that, delving into these things. However, it doesn't go very far, and that to me keeps it from being a great piece of literature or a great book, because it's really only sort of dipping into that, and rather than diving deep into it. And you can't really do that with 168 pages, as this copy is. You can't dive deep into that. However, it is seen through the eyes of Bob, the young man, well, the early teens. So that could sort of work that way, is fine. But then to me, it's still, because of that, it's not great literature. But it's a fun book. Don't get me wrong. It's a fun book, and I enjoyed it. It's sort of well written. There is problems with the typesetting in this, because there's erroneous mistakes, like miscellaneous letters here or there. It's just somebody didn't re-edit it very well. But it's not a sort of, it is a Houghton Mifflin book, so it is a major publisher. So it's a bit shoddy, if they didn't do this, or what were these typos in the original book. I don't know, but either way, somebody's let things down, and it wasn't edited properly. But anyway, let's get to the film now. The film is 1953, as I say. It's George Stevens, stars Alan Ladd, Jean Arthur. Alan Ladd is Shane. Jean Arthur is Marion Starrett, and Van Hefflin is Joe Starrett. Uh, the Bob's characters changed his name as Joey, to be sort of, Joe Jr. Um, not sure why they do that. There's no explanation why, and I always wonder why they do things like that. There's some really great sort of supporting actors in here. Ben Johnson plays Chris, the one that in the book he breaks his arm. In the film they change, and they telescope time a little bit. Uh, in the um, in the film, Shane shows up, and then all of a sudden it's Fletcher. Well, it's not Fletcher's. It's Riker's. They changed the name as well for the range owner, to from Fletcher to Riker. His men comes and Starrett thinks that Shane is part of them, so he tells them to bugger off. But he doesn't quite. He hears what's going on. He sort of steps into the scene, and they see him, and then Starrett is apologetic, and then asks him to stay, for a meal, and because of that, the meal, Shane goes out and starts chopping at the at the stump, which doesn't quite work as well as in the book. The idea of, because Shane was trying to leave everything behind, different life, and you could tell sort of that in the book that he probably hadn't been trusted much, and then all of a sudden this guy stranger is trusting him, trusting his word. And the other thing that's very, very changed is that right at the beginning, he's wearing his guns down into the valley. That didn't quite work as much then, I think, because he was trying to, leave his sort of old life behind. So it was a conscious decision before he came into the valley that he wanted to change, rather than in there with the Starretts and then decides to change. That's the way the film is, but it's beautifully photographed in Technicolor, 3-strip Technicolor, glorious Technicolor, and it's filmed in Wyoming at the Grand Tetons National Park, and the opening scene is a camera, just a wide vista of the valley up on high, and Shane rides by the camera down into the valley, and then there's a huge vista of the valley as well, and you see just a tiny little speck of him on a horse, riding along, just beautiful. And also too, just these large vistas, and there's in the commentary, which is fabulous. It talks about the lenses that they use. They used a wide angle lens. The mountains seemed so far away, and if they used a long lens, it sort of brings the mountains closer and bigger. So it's just beautiful. But anyway, getting back to other actors, the Chris is played by who I thought was a fabulous character actor, Ben Johnson. His character is a little different in there as well, but it's still good. Ben Johnson was he was a rodeo rider, and was sort of discovered by John Ford, and he's in a lot of John Ford films, and I really like him. Also Edgar Buchanan, which was a great character actor. He wound up in Petticoat Junction in the 60s for some reason. Anyway. Elijah Cook Jr. is really good too. He usually played sort of heavies and toughs and weasels and informants and stuff like that in sort of gangster films. He was in Maltese Falcon, and also too the little parts. What's her name? Trying to find her name. Sorry. Ellen Corby is Elijah Cook's character's wife, and she was in a lot of films, but she was Grandma Walton in the Waltons, if anybody watched that, and fabulously they cast Jack Palance as Wilson, the gunfighter that they hire, and he's just absolutely perfect. He's got a smarmy little look. He's like, you could see the psychosis, the cold killer in him, and the way he moves, the way he talks, the look in his eyes, movement, everything is just fabulous. That's done. The script was by an author. He wrote a novel. He was a novelist at the time. Did westerns. A.B. Guthrie Jr. But it was also there was other ones that sort of George Stevens actually did a little bit on the set, as well as Ivan Moffat, who was the executive producer, did a little bit of writing too. But as I say, they do change things, and as typical with films, they condense things. So as I say, it comes in, they get rid of the part of the traveling salesman and the cultivator and everything like that. So that's a very quick movement here, and then they do show the part where he's going into town. But instead of this was a good change, I think. He's sent into town to pick up wire at the goods store, and barbed wire, and that's a very little subtle thing, but it was very neat how that was put in, because this is the problem. They're fencing the range off with barbed wire, and that was there was like barbed wire wars at various times in the old West. And especially in even I think in the 1890s in Wyoming, there was where it was the 1890s, I think it was, that there was sort of some almost like range wars type things in the war, and that's what they were called sometimes, range wars. I don't know that much about that, but it was kind of an interesting period. But that was a really good change. But while he's in there, he gets some clothes, and he goes in, and he asked Bob before he left, or sorry, Joey, in the film, do you want anything? And he says, oh, can you get me some soda pop? So that's what he goes into the bar, the saloon for, is soda pop. So that's set up, which is fine. But he's still made fun of. But he doesn't do anything because Starrett told him, stay out of our business. Don't get mixed up in anything. So he doesn't do anything. He walks away. But that again causes problems, and they all think he's a coward. And all the other homesteaders hear this, and there was Edgar Buchanan's character watches this and just thinks this is deplorable. So he goes back again with the family, because they decide, okay, well, they're not gonna go in individually. They'll go in as a group, and they go in on a Saturday, and Shane takes the empty bottle, like Joey was going to take it, sort of give it back to the bartender, but Shane does it because he knows that Chris is in there, and they have a fight. But he doesn't break his arm. But then at the end, like it's Riker who says, we won't allow this being done, us, beating up this guy. We're gonna ride you out. We're gonna beat you up. So then, they bring the both fights together, of him originally with Chris, and then with the five, and then Starrett comes in to help, and then they all shit, breaks loose because of that, because they beat him up, basically. One guy was holding his own pretty well right to the end, against five big guys. So yeah, and there are a few other changes I'll get to in a moment, but one of the first thing that I want to say that's interesting is the this is going to go on a little. I'll try to wrap this up as quick as possible, but there's a lot of stuff to say here. Victor Young did the music, and he did the music for The Uninvited as well. So there's a connection there. But there are a few other changes in the story. But other than those condenses, most of the stuff, it plays out like the book does pretty well, because there's not a lot in the book. but there is subtleties of looks and stuff like that do convey the depth of the characters and everything like that, and that's done through a little bit of dialogue, but also through close-ups to either the Joey's face, or who's played by Brandon DeWalda. I thought it was Wilde, but the commentators say DeWilde or Walda. Um, he was a young character actor, but he died in his early 20s in a car accident in, I think, 70s. Yeah, probably, or 60s, 70s, I think. Um, but yeah, there's a couple other changes that were really good, that actually enhanced the story, I think. Well, the one about the change of him going in to get an implement fixed at the blacksmith in the book, where he's going in to collect barbed wire. That was a good one, and it was just a subtle thing of explaining. Like, there's so much background to that. And another one, or another two, which it was kind of funny. Neil Senior does a little, as an extra, a little video essay about this, and he mentioned those two, and I go, damn, I thought I had something interesting. Well, it is interesting, but he mentions it exact same way. In the book, Joe Starrett tells his son Bob, don't get too close. Don't like Shane too much, because, there's a variety of reasons he says this. But it's sort of, because he knows he'll leave, or he could wind up doing something bad to other people. He realizes that, he's a dangerous guy, but not to them. He can be dangerous to somebody else, but he'll never be dangerous to them. In the film, it's the mother, Marion, who says it to Joey. She says, "Don't get too close to him," and he asks why, and she's saying, "Well, he'll leave in that." But there's a deeper one that she's telling herself that she shouldn't, because you can tell she's kind of she's taken by him. There's no sort of triangle thing or anything like that, but there is, you could tell that Shane is, likes her, and she likes him, but there's no shenanigans going on, and it, even through the film, they subtly do it, because she starts out, the first time we see her in the film, Jean Arthur's character, she's dressed in trousers, pants, and a work shirt, and then as the film goes on, she puts on dresses and becomes a little more feminine, and that's what was, according to the George Stevens Jr., who is the son. He was a clerk of some sort, while the film was going on. Him and Ivan Moffat, the executive producer, did the excellent commentary on it. But like he says, there was a memo saying this is how she, her clothing should be like. But yeah, and then another one is where Shane is showing Bob in the book how to shoot, and he tells him, a gun is a tool like anything else, like an axe or anything like that, and it's neither good nor bad. It's as good as the man who wields it. But they change it, and they change it to the better in the film. He says that to the mother, who sees him teaching Joey how to shoot, and he says this to her, and she says, "Well, be better," because she backs this up, or not backs it up, but she counters this with saying it'd be better not to have any guns whatsoever. So I thought that was a better scene. Um, And another thing that's really neat, too, is a couple things, like the sound of the gun in there is like, it's like cannon fire. It's like so abrupt and so loud. It's louder than in any other film, basically. And George Stevens wanted to have this. He wanted to be a shock because he made this in 1953. He was sort of, he started out making Laurel and Hardy comedies, and he did some other, romantic comedy type things. Penny Serenade with Cary Grant. Was it Irene Dunn? I think, I'm not sure, but Cary Grant. And his other big film was Place in the Sun, which with Montgomery Clift, Elizabeth Taylor, and Shelley Winters. It was from Theodore Dreiser's American Tragedy. That was previously 1951, and it was a huge hit. But he also, during the war, he was a photographer, and he went in with the liberation of Dachau, sorry, the death camp, Dachau, and he filmed it and everything like that, and he saw, and this is sort of, he wanted to, and he couldn't really, he was dismayed by the fact that in films that, people were shot by a 45, and they fall forward, they get up, and they do all this stuff, and the violence was sort of glorified in a sense and not real. So he wanted to make it as real as possible. So the sound is the one thing. It's a shocking sound, and it would have been at the time, because, as they say in the commentary, that film was low, and these punctuations of bang, 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 really loud. It would have shocked the viewers, I think, because they weren't used to it. It's not now where they, in theaters and in cinemas, you've got all loud sound effects. Then you didn't quite have that loud of sound effects. And the other thing was too that when Wilson, the gunfighter, shoots Elijah Cook's character, when he goads him into to drawing, it's one shot, and he gets thrown basically off his feet and thrown backward into the mud. Just boom, done, end of. It's a very graphic scene. So yeah, and just a few other things I want to say. Yeah, it's like as I say, the main character is Alan Ladd as Shane, Jean Arthur as Marion Starrett, and Van Hefflin as Joe Starrett. They originally wanted Montgomery Clift as Shane. Not sure how that would have worked, but okay. He backed out, and they were going to have William Holden as Starrett, and I go, yeah, that can work, and they even say that in the commentary. But then they wanted Katharine Hepburn as Marion, and I'm going, yeah, she's a good actress, but no, I don't think Jean Arthur just is marvelous in this, because she has that voice, that sort of squeaky, sort of emotional little squeaks in her voice that really, really enhance the dialogue. And it was a hugely expensive film for the time. It was over $3 million, I think, it made for it. But yeah, and well, the other thing I was going to say is they have the Lux Radio Theater. It's a version that went out to the armed forces network, I think, as well. And Alan Ladd does it. It's an hour long, so it's again truncated. It's pretty close, but it is truncated. Alan Ladd is Shane, and Van Hefflin is Starrett. But Marion Starrett is played by Ruth Hussy in the radio thing, who was on the Uninvited. So there's the other connection there. I thought was kind of neat. But it's a really good. I love radio dramas. I'm not talking about them enough in here, but as you can see, it's like time's going on. I'm 40 minutes already. But the other thing about the extras in this, I forgot to say. Oh, it's the Eureka's Masters of Cinema version, and it's fantastic. The extras, they're a little short on extras in a sense, because there's the Lux Radio Theater, there's a trailer, and there's the commentary. But the commentary is fantastic, and there's a little booklet, 20-some pages, some really good pieces in here. There's an excerpted essay by Penelope Houston from 1953 about the film, and she became sort of the editor later in the 50s of Sight and Sound. It's a fabulous essay. She writes extremely well. It's sort of it is void of sort of today's BS. I say, well, that's another topic. And there's an interview, an unpublished interview, with George Stevens from 1969. It's only a part of the interview, and it's been unpublished. So that was nice to see that. And then there's a little, it's called a prologue, by Ian Moffat. He's the executive producer. He wanted to sort of have a prologue to it, and it wouldn't have worked, but it describes of sort of years after, I think Joey thinking back and then having an epilogue. But yeah, they cut it, which was good. But anyway, that's Shane. I think that was more or less all I was gonna say. Yeah. The book is okay, as I say. It's just, it's not, I don't think, as good as most say. I'm looking for, sorry, yeah. I don't know where the book is. Because I was going to say next week is going to be the Spiral Staircase, and the book is I have it here somewhere. I think it's called Some Much Must Watch by Ethel something White. Oh, sorry, I do have it here because I'm going to read it this week. So it's in my reading pile this week. Here we go. Some Must Watch, Ethel Lena White. Very big writer in at the time, and also wrote the Lady Vanishes, or the Wheel Turns, or something it's called. But this will be the film. It's the book was written in 1933, and the film was done. Look here, 1946, with Dorothy McGuire, George Brent, and Ethel Barrymore. It's directed by Robert Siodmak. Connections with silent film, but yeah, so that'll be next week. So I did say I was going to figure out what I was going to, but that'll be it. And that's it for this week. I do apologize if you've waited if you lasted this long, almost 45 minutes. I thank you, but there was a little more. I sort of felt that sometimes I'm rushing with the description a little bit, and I wanted to bring a little more in about the a few things regarding the book. But anyway, I hope everybody's doing well, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, BookTube.